Thank you, Mr. President. President Obama has issued a proclamation that this week is Prescription Opioid and Heroin Epidemic Awareness Week. As the President explained, we pause to remember all those that we have lost to opioid use disorder. We stand with the courageous individuals in recovery, and we recognize the importance of raising awareness of this epidemic. So, in recognition of Prescription Opioid and Heroin Epidemic Awareness Week, I am here with my colleagues to convey the urgency of responding to this crisis. I'd like to start my remarks with a story that I heard just yesterday from a wonderful man named Patrick Byrne. I met yesterday with Patrick as he was awarded the 2016 Special Education Award Hero of the Year Award by the National Association of Letter Carriers. Patrick is from Lynn, Massachusetts, and he lost his son, James Byrne, to heroin addiction. Here is their story. James Byrne lived a fairly normal life in many ways. The son of Lynn, Massachusetts Branch 7 President and Army vet Patrick Byrne, James had a good upbringing and strong family ties. He had a master's degree in computer science and made a good living in IT. But throughout his adult life, James had been hooked on heroin, a drug easily found on Lynn's post-industrial streets. James had periods of sobriety, but circumstances always seemed to steal them from him eventually. James had enjoyed 7 months clean of drugs when an old friend and fellow addict called him one day in January of 2014 to beg James to find heroin for him. After first refusing, James gave in and bought some for his friend and apparently couldn't resist using it himself instead. The friend called James on his cell phone over and over as James lay dying of an overdose on the floor of his sister's house just down the street from his father's home. That's where Patrick found him. After making his story public, Patrick heard from many other letter carriers about their own struggles with addiction, depression, or mental illness in their families. Patrick said, "I was shocked at how many people are dealing with similar problems." Inspired by Patrick's experiences and his efforts to educate fellow carriers and the broader public about the need to remove the stigma of addiction, the Postal Service Employee Assistance Program launched the Silent No More initiative. The program is designed to help postal employees or their families break through the stigma and shame to share personal stories. I thank Patrick for his leadership and service, and I pray for his family and for all the parents who are relying on hope and strength as they look for the support to achieve long-term recovery. None of us can be silent anymore in the face of this epidemic. But in order to get Patrick and all the families who are suffering the help that they need, when they need it, the federal government needs to invest in funding treatment and recovery programs. So far, Congress has failed in this task. In Massachusetts, I am hearing enormous frustration from people who don't feel that adequate resources are being brought to bear on this epidemic of prescription drug and heroin addiction. Countless individuals and families suffering with addiction cannot find a bed for detox. And then, when they are at their most vulnerable moment in recovery, they cannot find a place or provider for long-term treatment. In May, Senator Shaheen from New Hampshire introduced legislation for $600 million in emergency funding to combat this crisis. Then again, in July, I and others argued on the floor for the need to invest $1.1 billion into opioid treatment and recovery programs. But both times, when Senator Shaheen made the case and then others joined on the floor asking for additional funding, all of that was blocked so that we could not, in fact, provide real funding that cities and states need to fight this epidemic. We will not save the lives and stop this scourge of addiction with just words and promises. We will not save lives with legislation that pays only lip service to providing treatment. So I stand here today during Prescription Opioid and Heroin Epidemic Awareness Week to pledge that I will not stop fighting for funding. In Boston, there is an area of our city called the Methadone Mile. It is approximately 1 square mile, and it is the location of methadone clinics, safety net hospitals, and homeless shelters. It is also the home to those struggling with addiction, those receiving treatment for addiction, and the litany of saints and angels who are providing the desperately needed services for those suffering from mental health and substance abuse disorders. It is a 1 mile, one-stop shop for hope and ground zero in the battle against addiction in Boston. Here in Washington, we are at the epicenter of the money mile. It's both an area where big pharma's lobbyists toil with the task of ensuring that even during the storm of prescription drug heroin and fentanyl overdose deaths, the deluge of prescriptions for opiate-based painkillers goes unabated. When pitted against the money mile, the methadone mile doesn't stand a chance. Money mile and its army of big pharma lobbyists are the reason that mandatory prescriber education is not a law. It is the reason that partial fill prescriptions is not a law. It is the reason that the Food and Drug Administration and other federal agencies and state agencies across our country have not done the job over the years and have, in fact, been complicit in the worsening of this epidemic. Without real funding for opioid addiction treatment, the methadone mile, and all the other areas in cities across this country will continue to drown in overdoses and deaths. Our cities are fighting a war, and we need to help them.